Hello everyone. Thank you for signing up today to read the Scrum Guide along with me. This is Suganya Gangajatesan, a professional Scrum Master and Agile coach for Hello everyone. Thank you for Hello everyone. Thank you for signing up today to read the Scrum Guide along with me. This is Suganya Gangajatesan, a professional Scrum Master and Agile coach for many years now, and the author of the book Career Transition to Scrum Master. I'm glad that you are here. Today we are diving into something fundamental but yet transformative in the Agile world, the Scrum Guide. Whether you're new to Agile or prepping yourself for any certification or just here to understand what is Scrum and Agile, this session is for you. Scrum is the most popular framework that's used by the teams across the world to deliver a high quality work in efficient and collaborative way. So understanding this is not only a career booster, but it also helps you to build a better, faster and more effective team. So I'll be reading the full Scrum guide for you. And more than that, I'll be breaking it down and explaining the key concept in a simple term. So you can get up to speed quickly and start applying Scrum in your team. So this isn't going to be a dry reading. We are here to learn, reflect, and grow together. And for this, you owe me the next 90 minutes. So grab your cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's explore the Scrum guide together. This Scrum Guide, authored by Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, November 2020. So the latest version that we are reading now is November 2020 version, but the first Scrum Guide was published in 2010. After that, it had 7 revisions, and the latest one is November 2020 version. If you want to know about all the revisions, modifications, addition that are made in the Scrum Guide since its publication, I would recommend you to watch my other video in the description. It's quite a big one, so I don't want to delve into it right now. As far as we read the recent Scrum Guide, we are good to go. Purpose of this Scrum Guide. We developed Scrum in early 1990s. We wrote the first version of the Scrum Guide in 2010 to help people worldwide understand Scrum. We have evolved the guide since then through small functional updates. Together, we stand behind it. The Scrum Guide contains the definition of Scrum. Each element of the framework serves a specific purpose that is essential to the overall value and result realized with Scrum. Changing the core design or ideas of Scrum, leaving out elements or not following the rules of Scrum covers up problems and limits the benefits of Scrum, potentially even rendering it useless. We follow the growing use of Scrum within the ever-growing complex world. We are humbled to see Scrum being adopted in many domains, holding essentially complex work beyond software product development where Scrum has its roots. As Scrum use spreads, developers, researchers, analysts, scientists, and other specialists do the work. We use the word developers in Scrum not to exclude but to simplify. If you get value from Scrum, consider yourself included. And potentially it renders useless. And Scrum has been adopted by a lot of other domains apart from software development, but software development has its roots. And make a note of the word developer. It is not only for the software development team, it is just to simplify the guide and not to exclude any other domains. Coming to the content section, Scrum Guide has only 13 pages. It is really short, to the point. Let's see the content to get a high-level view of what's in it. Starts with purpose of the Scrum Guide, then Scrum definition, Scrum theory, Scrum values, Scrum team, Scrum events, Scrum artifacts, and EndNote. So let's get started. Scrum definition. Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, team, and organization generate value through adaptive solution for complex problems. In a nutshell, Scrum requires a Scrum Master to foster an environment where a product owner orders the work for a complex problem into a product backlog. The Scrum team turns a selection of work into an increment of value during the sprint. The Scrum team and its stakeholders inspects the result and adjust for the next sprint. Repeat. Scrum is simple. Try it as is and determine whether it's a philosophy, theory, structure that helps to achieve goals and create values. The Scrum framework is purposefully incomplete, only defining the implement Scrum theory. Scrum is built upon by a collective intelligence of people using it. rather than provide people with Scrum guide their relationship and interactions. Various process, technique, and methods can be employed within the framework. Scrum wraps around existing practice or renders them, and Scrum makes visible the relative efficacy of current management environment and work techniques so that improvements can be made. In Scrum definition, Scrum is defined as a lightweight framework, and it says team generates values for complex problems. First, let's understand what is a lightweight framework. It means Scrum has just enough structure to guide the team, and it does not overwhelm the team with a lot of rigid rules. So it is a very light framework. It also says it's for complex problems. So why is it so? Why is Scrum prescribed for complex problems? Basically, there are 4 types of project: simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. So Scrum is a best fit for complex problems. But how do you identify whether your project falls under which category? There's a simple way to explain this. It's called Stacey matrix. It's really simple to understand. Consider 2 axes where the x-axis is how and y-axis represent what. And it goes between certain to uncertain. So what it means is, how much clarity do we have on how to build the project, right? Between certain to uncertain. So like it could be, how could be technology or domain. How much knowledge do we have on a technology on how to build the solution for the project or the domain, right? And y-axis talks about what. How much clarity do we have on what is the requirement? And how do you rate between certain to uncertain? What could be requirement? Could talk about requirement. So now the closer proximity to the intersection of 2 axes is simple. It's called simple zone, where how to implement the project, the approach, and what to implement in the project is really known. Sorry. Alright, so this is a simple project. Agile methodology may not be required because there's no much need to adapt to the changing requirements. And the next zone is complicated. In this zone, either what or how is not known. For example, we could have some clarity on what to build on as part of the project, but we're not sure on what technology to use, or vice versa. We know the technology, we have the domain knowledge, but we don't have a clear requirement from the stakeholders. So either one of this have uncertainty or unknowns. So in that case, it is categorized as complicated project. And the next zone is complex. So this is where we are talking about. Scrum is the best fit for complex project. Complex is very close to the uncertain of both the axes. This means the stakeholders are not clear on what to implement and how to implement. So in that case, we need a method where we can start working on it, see what works better, and then learn from it, inspect, adapt from it. So we need a methodology where we start to work and then see what works best, right? So you start with a smaller deliverable, see whether it works or not, inspect and adapt and go from there. So that's why Scrum is the best fit for complex projects, which has a lot of uncertainties on how and what of the project. And the last zone is chaotic, where both the zones are uncertain. So we don't have requirement clarity. We don't know how to implement, how to approach the project. In such case, the basic idea is to bring that project to a certain controllable level to the complex zone and then go for Scrum. Or Kanban also works better for chaotic project. So to our point to the Scrum guide, Scrum is the best fit for complex project. I hope you understand why. Let's move on. Here they describe a very short description of how to run the Scrum, a very short and crisp definition, including roles and responsibilities. So product owner orders the work, Scrum team works on it and increment, Scrum team and stakeholders together inspect and adapt, repeat. So it's really simple, right? But where is the Scrum Master? It's here. Scrum requires a Scrum Master to foster the Scrum environment. So this explains at a high level on how to run a Scrum and who does what. Moving on, Scrum is simple and they also say that it's purposefully incomplete. Yeah, there are hundreds of books and thousands of blogs to talk about Scrum, right? It is that wide topic, but still Scrum Guide is purposefully kept incomplete so that it can serve as a living document and can be refined. As I said, it already has a lot of revision to the initial publication. Then it says Scrum wraps around existing practices. This means Scrum just provides the essential structure, but it also allows the team to use additional processes or technique as required. One such practice is Scrum refinement. So Scrum refinement is not a mandatory event that's defined in the Scrum Guide as part of the Scrum events, but it's a best practice that the team can adapt. Moving on to Scrum theory. Scrum theory. Scrum is founded on empiricism and lean thinking. Empiricism asserts that knowledge comes from experience and making decisions based on what is observed. Lean thinking reduces waste and focuses on essentials. Scrum employs an iterative incremental approach to optimize predictability and to control risk. Scrum engages group of people who collectively have all the skills and expertise to do the work and share or acquire such skills as needed. Scrum combines four formal events, the sprint. These events work because they implement the empirical Scrum pillars of transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So here the first paragraph talk about empiricism and lean thinking. What is empiricism? So empiricism is the foundation of Scrum and it's really important to understand what it is. Empiricism is actually a Greek word. It means experience. It's an idea that all the knowledge comes from experiences and observations. So what it means in Agile is don't go by books because you cannot predict the future. You have to adapt to the changing environment. So for that you have to be open-minded and be flexible to change. And that's what is empiricism. Empiricism means learning from experience. Next, what is lean thinking? It is actually a business methodology that emerged from a manufacturing sector. To be specific, it's Toyota, and this is developed in 1950s. So lean thinking is nothing but reducing waste and improving process to create a value to the customer. So the key principle of lean thinking is eliminating waste. Agile suggests lean thinking because it wants us to eliminate all the unwanted practices and focus on only what is required to deliver a value to the customer. Then it talks about iterative and incremental approach. That means you'll not focus on building the complete product at a stretch as we do in the waterfall model. Rather, you slice down the requirement into smaller pieces, work on a small piece of requirement, deliver it, get feedback, and if that works, go for the next requirement. If it doesn't, rework. This is the key principle of Agile. Deliver fast. They even say fail fast. So if the approach we are taking is not right or not a right fit for the customer or for the stakeholders, then we will come to know in a very early stage. So we will fail fast and that will save a lot of cost. It says Scrum engages a group of people that have all the skills. So what it means is we don't have separate teams like separate development team, testing team, design team, no more separate teams. It's just one Scrum team which has all the required skill and one container event, the sprint. So there are altogether 5 events. Why are these events called the practices within the Scrum framework? Scrum Masters are true leaders who serves the Scrum team and the larger organization. The Scrum Master serves the Scrum team in several ways, including coaching the team member in self-managing and cross-functionality, helping the Scrum team focuses on creating high-value increment that meets definition of done, causing the removal of impediments to the Scrum team's progress, and ensuring that all Scrum events take place and are positive, productive, and kept within the time box. The Scrum Master serves product owner in several ways, including helping find techniques for effective product goal definition and product backlog management, helping the Scrum team understand the need for clear and concise product backlog items, helping establish empirical product planning for the complex environment, and facilitating stakeholder collaboration as requested or needed. The Scrum Master serves the organization in several ways, including leading, training, and coaching the organization in its Scrum adoption, planning and advising Scrum implementation within the organization, helping employees and stakeholders understand and enact an empirical approach for complex work, and removing barriers between stakeholders and the Scrum team. The Scrum Master, the gatekeeper of Scrum. Scrum Master is the person who helps the team with understanding the Scrum practices and Scrum theories. And also, Scrum Masters are called as true leaders. Initially, it was referred as servant leader, but Scrum Masters hold a lot of accountability. I think it's the right decision to call them a true leader. So when it comes to Scrum Master, there are different set of responsibilities to the different people. Like there are a set of responsibilities that the Scrum Master serve to the Scrum team, and there's a different set for product owner and the different set for the organization. So the Scrum Master serves the Scrum team by coaching them, help them create valuable increments, remove impediments, ensure all the Scrum event takes place at the right cadence. The Scrum Master can share techniques that helps the product owner to maintain the product backlog items. And the Scrum Master can tag along with the product owner to help the team understand the product goal, help the team understand the product backlog items, establish empirical product planning, so ensuring that the three pillars are lived, and facilitating stakeholders' collaboration whenever required. Apart from the Scrum team, the Scrum Master also have a wider accountability within the organization. It could be coaching the organization, advising or helping the Scrum implementation within the organization, helping the employees and stakeholders understand the empirical processes, removing barriers between the stakeholder and the Scrum team. So that explains the roles and responsibilities of each of the defined roles in the Scrum Guide. Scrum events. The sprint is the container of all other events. Each event in Scrum is a formal opportunity to inspect and adapt Scrum artifacts. These events are specifically designed to enable the transparency required. Failure to operate any event as prescribed results in lost opportunity to inspect and adapt. Events are used in Scrum to create regularity and to minimize the need for meeting not defined in Scrum. Optimally, all events are held at the same time and place to reduce complexity. The sprint. Sprints are the heartbeat of Scrum, where ideas are turned into values. They are fixed length event of 1 month or less to create consistency. A new sprint starts immediately after the conclusion of the previous sprint. All the work necessary to achieve the product goal, including sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospectives, happen within the sprint. During the sprint, no changes are made that would endanger the sprint goal. Quality does not decrease. The product backlog is refined as needed, and the scope may be clarified and renegotiated with the product owner as more is learned. Sprints enable predictability by ensuring inspection and adaptation of progress towards the product goal at least every calendar month. When a sprint's horizon is too long, the sprint goal may become invalid, complexity might rise, and the risk may increase. Shorter sprints can be employed to generate more learning cycles and limit risk of cost and effort to the smaller time frame. Each sprint may be considered a short project. Various practices exist to forecast progress like burn down, burn up, or cumulative flows. While proven useful, these do not replace the importance of empiricism. In complex environment, what will happen is unknown. Only what has already happened may be used for forward-looking decision making. The sprint could be cancelled if the sprint goal becomes obsolete. Only the product owner has the authority to cancel the sprint. To keep it more clear, let me help visualize the key points to remember in all the events. So first, the first event is the sprint, the container event. Imagine this to be a container event, the sprint. So why do we need this? It's because Scrum suggests that we need to time box any goal, right? So we need to have a time box to be set for the developers for their short-term goals. And that's why we have sprint. Sprint is nothing but a fixed duration that keeps on repeating on the same cadence. So the other key factors that we have to talk about is events. Why do we have the event? What is the reason for that event? Who should be part of that event? What do we do in the event? Duration of the event. And what are the artifacts that we have to take care in that event? So these are the key points that I would like to summarize and give a visual view of all the events together. So let's see one by one. The first one, the sprint. As I said, why do we have that event? It's because we want to time box the goal. We want to have shorter goals and time box that. So it's to fix timeline. Who are part of the sprint? It's obviously the whole Scrum team. So when I say Scrum team, it includes developers, product owner, and Scrum Master. So full Scrum team should be part of it. And what do we do inside the sprint? Basically, we work on the product. So we do all the work to achieve the product goal. All work or sprint goal. All work done to achieve sprint goal, right? And the duration could be to the very minimum 2 week sprint, or even I've heard 1 week sprint, and to the maximum it can be 1 month. So always the Scrum Guide prescribes the maximum duration for all the events. So for sprint it's 1 month max. There's a specific artifacts for the sprint. It follows the other events. So this is a high level points of what is there in a sprint. There is one thing that should be constant throughout the sprint. It should not change. What it is? It is the sprint goal. Once the sprint goal is set, it should not change throughout the sprint. So we have a very shorter sprint, and for that the goal that we are setting should hold good for the complete sprint. There could be a lot of work reprioritization, but it should all align to the same sprint goal. And quality does not decrease. And it also says product backlog is refined. So basically it talks about the sprint refinement, which we do as a good practice. And even Scrum is talking about that, but it is not mandating it as a Scrum event. Whenever there's scope creep, addition or removal, then that goes for a discussion. We need to discuss with the product owner and make the necessary changes as required. It also suggests to go with a shorter timeline for the sprint, because if the timeline is too long, there is a risk of the goal becoming invalid. So better to have the shorter sprint. And each sprint should be considered as a project in itself. So it also talks about certain metrics like burn down, burn up, cumulative flows, just to visualize on what's happening in the team at a high level. Where are we towards the product goal? And I said that the sprint goal should not change, but how that is achieved when the goal itself becomes invalid. So in that case, what we do is cancel the sprint. So the product owner has the authority to cancel the sprint only if the sprint goal becomes obsolete, when there's no need for the selected work to be done. So that's one edge case scenario. Next, sprint planning. Sprint planning. Sprint planning initiates the sprint by laying out the work to be performed for the sprint. This resulting plan is created by the collaborative work of the entire Scrum team. The product owner ensures that attendees are prepared to discuss the most important product backlog items and how they map to the product goal. The Scrum team may also invite other people to attend the sprint planning to provide advice. Sprint planning addresses the following topic. Topic 1. Why is this sprint valuable? The product owner proposes how the product could increase its value and utility to the current sprint. The whole Scrum team then collaborates to define a sprint goal that communicates why the sprint is valuable to the stakeholders. The sprint goal must be finalized prior to the end of the sprint planning. Topic 2. What can be done this sprint? Through discussion with the product owner, the developers select items from the product backlog to include in the current sprint. The Scrum team may refine these items during this process, which increases understanding and confidence. Selecting how much can be completed within a sprint may be challenging. However, the more the developers know about their past performance, their upcoming capacity, and the definition of done, the more confident they will be in the sprint forecast. Topic 3. How will the chosen work get done? For each selected product backlog items, the developer planned the work necessary to create an increment that meets the definition of done. This is often done by decomposing product backlog items into smaller work items of 1 day or less. How this is done is at the sole discretion of the developers. No one else can tell them how to turn product backlog item into increment of values. The sprint goal, the product backlog items selected for the sprint, plus the plan for delivering them are together referred to as sprint backlog. Sprint planning is time boxed to a maximum of 8 hours for a 1-month sprint. For shorter sprints, the event is usually shorter. So the sprint planning is the second event. It usually happens on the first day of the sprint, okay? Day 1 is sprint planning. So this only initiates the sprint, kickstarts the sprint. This is where the team plan on what work could be done in the sprint. The product owner prioritizes the backlog, and the development team should pick from the prioritized backlog list and commit to what they are going to do for the sprint along with the sprint goal. So who attends this is again the full Scrum team. Why do we do this? To create a plan, to plan for sprint, to plan sprint work. And what do we do? So basically the sprint planning should address 3 questions. Why, what, and how. Why is this sprint valuable? Why sprint valuable? So it means that we have to come up with a common sprint goal, and that has to be communicated to the stakeholders. And all the Scrum team and the stakeholders should be in the same page that this is the sprint goal for the sprint. So once the sprint goal is fixed, then comes what? What can be achieved in this sprint? What to work? So the requirement could be big, right? The feature could be big, but we need to figure out how much can be done inside this sprint. So that part is also valid. First, why part talks about the sprint goal. Why is this sprint valuable to the stakeholders? And it comes with the sprint goals. And next comes what? What are we committing for the sprint? And the third one is obviously how. How are we going to implement? How to implement. So the developers take this story one by one, discuss about it, even slice it down into task level on how we are going to achieve it. So that gives them a lot of clarity on how to achieve that goal and turn the sprint backlog item into a valuable increment. I think that's clear. And then what is the duration of the sprint planning? So for 1 month of sprint, it could be 8 hours. So all the duration given here is for 1 month sprint. Right? So 8 hours is the maximum duration that we can take for sprint planning in the sprint. And when we talk about artifacts, I think we need to slice it down further into 2 categories. What goes as input and what goes as output. right? So for the sprint planning, the input would be product backlog. So that is what the product owner comes up with, a prioritized list of product backlog. And then after the sprint planning, the development team will have a subset of product backlog taken for the sprint, and that is called sprint backlog. So the ultimate goal of the sprint planning event is to come up with a sprint goal and come up with a backlog of the list of work that we should be doing in the sprint. So that's all about the sprint planning. Daily Scrum. The purpose of the daily Scrum is to inspect progress towards the sprint goal and adapt the sprint backlog as necessary, adjusting the upcoming planned work. The daily Scrum is 15 minutes event for the developers of the Scrum team. To reduce complexity, it is held at the same time and place every working day of the sprint. If the product owner or Scrum Masters are actively working on the items in the sprint backlog, they participate as developers. The developers can select whatever structure and technique they want as long as the daily Scrum focuses on progress towards the sprint goal and produces an actionable plan for the next day of work. This creates focus and improves self-management. Daily scrums improve communications, identify impediments, promote quick decision making, and consequently eliminate the need for other meetings. The daily scrum is not the only time developers are allowed to adjust their plan. They often meet throughout the day for more detailed discussion about adapting or replanning the rest of the sprint's work. Daily scrum. Why do we have daily scrum? So it is to inspect on daily basis on how we are progressing towards the sprint goal. So it enables transparency, inspection and adaptation whenever required. The main goal of the daily scrum is to inspect the progress towards the sprint goal, right? To inspect daily. This is a daily event and should happen on daily basis at the same place and at the same time so that it gets registered and becomes a habit, and there's no need to check your calendar on when it is happening and where it is happening, and that gives a consistency to all the developers. Who should be part of the daily scrum? The development team should be part of it. Scrum Master and product owner can join if they want to, but the development team is mandated. And what they discuss. The earlier version of Scrum Guide had some suggestion on how you want to run the daily Scrum. Like it suggests like what you did the previous day, what you do the current day, and do we have impediments. But the latest version has removed it because that structure restricts a lot of other discussion. Basically, it can be in any flow. The developers can go with whatever flow they want to, but the focus should be on the sprint goal, whether we are moving towards the sprint goal, is there any issues in that. So that is should be the focus on the discussion. So what they discuss could be progress or impediments or risk. It could be any of these which is potentially affecting the sprint goal. And the duration for the daily scrum is always 15 minutes. So that's why earlier it was suggested that the scrum team should not be more than 10, because the duration can have only 15 minutes. This is to minimize the burden on the meetings and focus more on work. So that's why we have a cadence of 15 minutes on daily basis so that it can be really to the point, and the detailed discussion can go on later. It is not only this event that the developers are collaborating. This is a mandated event, but whenever required, the developers should be able to collaborate throughout the day. And coming to artifacts, for daily Scrum, we don't have any specific artifacts to talk about. Sprint review. The purpose of the sprint review is to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptation. The Scrum team presents the result of their work to key stakeholders and progress towards this product goal as discussed. During this event, the Scrum team and stakeholders review what was accomplished in the sprint and what has changed in their environment. Based on this information, attendees collaborate on what to do next. The product backlog may also be adjusted to meet new opportunities. The sprint review is the working session, and the Scrum team should avoid limiting it to the presentation. The sprint review is the second to the last event of the sprint and is time boxed to the maximum of 4 hours in a 1 month sprint. For shorter sprints, the event is usually shorter. Next, sprint review. Why do we have sprint review? It's because that's the place where the developers showcase the work done to the stakeholders and they inspect the outcome together. So this is the key event to say whether the sprint was a success or not. And so why do we do this? To demo the sprint, right? And who is part of this is Scrum team and stakeholders. Okay, and what do we do as part of the sprint review? So the developers should present their work on what they achieved for the sprint. It should not be a PPT, but it should showcase the actual value that they are delivering to the stakeholders, and they get feedback from the stakeholders to see whether that fulfills the sprint goal. If yes, then great, they are moving on. Otherwise, that's an opportunity to modify the requirement as needed and add it back to the product backlog. Now, coming to the timeline, the daily Scrum runs on daily basis throughout the sprint, and the sprint review happens towards the end of the sprint. Sprint review, right? But it can also happen in the between. So there are some practices where team will actually split the work and show one demo or one sprint review in mid of the sprint, right? And then one at end of the sprint. It's completely fine. Coming back here, so what they do is inspect the outcome. Inspect the outcome, right? The duration for the sprint review is 4 hours for a 1 month sprint. What are the artifacts for sprint review? After the review is complete, there could be some scope creep or additional requirement that needs to be added to the backlog, product backlog. So the output should be modified product backlog. Product backlog. And also, whatever is completed as part of the sprint and completely satisfied by the stakeholders goes to the increment list. That usually happens on the last day of the sprint. The main purpose of sprint retro is to reflect on what happened in the sprint. This enables continuous improvement. So it's like reflecting on sprint. Who should be part of this is the Scrum team. So what they do is, this is the time where the full team can talk about any issues they are facing or any process improvement they suggest with regards to individuals, interactions, process, tools, and DOD, definition of done. So basically they inspect with regards to people, process, tools, definition of done. So in addition to these issues, they can also talk about what went well and what went well in the sprint and what was their learning. You can add on that to the sprint backlog or the product backlog itself. So it basically increase the quality and effectiveness of the team. People always consider this as optional event, but it's definitely worth spending this time. and the duration is 3 hours for a 1 month sprint. What could be the artifacts? The output can have a modified product backlog. After sprint retro, the most impactful improvement that came as a suggestion or in discussion can move on to the product backlog, and modified product backlog could be one of the output artifacts for sprint retro. So I think this view helps you visualize on what are all the events that we have to focus on throughout the sprint, and it also explains why do we do it, who should be part of it, and what do we do at a high level. Let's move on. Scrum artifacts. Scrum's artifacts represents work or value. They are designed to maximize transparency of key information. Thus everyone inspecting them has the same basis of adaptation. Each artifact contains a commitment to ensure it provides information that enhances transparency and focuses against which progress can be measured. For the product backlog, it is the product goal. For the sprint backlog, it is the sprint goal. For the increment, it is definition of done. These commitments exist to reinforce empiricism and the Scrum values for the Scrum team and their stakeholders. Why do we have these Scrum artifacts? Basically, Agile doesn't recommend a lot of documentation, but still it talks about the 3 artifacts in the Scrum guide. Why is it so? Because that serves as a basis for achieving empiricism. The Scrum artifacts are nothing but the source of info. It's a place to refer on what has been done in the past, what is there in our plate for the future, and what are we doing now. Basically, it talks about these 3 things, and if it is available as an artifacts, that gives the same level of information to whoever is reading this. So all of them will be in the same page. We already saw a bit on the artifacts. Let's see that in detail. The first artifact is product backlog. The next is sprint backlog. And the third one is increment. These are the 3 artifacts that a Scrum team needs to maintain in order to share the right information to all of them. These are the source of information. Product backlog. The product backlog is an emergent ordered list of what is needed to improve the product. It is the single source of work undertaken by the Scrum team. Product backlog items that can be done by the Scrum team within one sprint are deemed ready for selection in the sprint planning event. They usually acquire this degree of transparency after refining activities. Product backlog refinement is the act of breaking down and further defining product backlog items into smaller or more precise items. This is an ongoing activity to add details such as a description, order, and size. Attributes often vary with the domain of the work. Developers who will be doing the work are responsible for the sizing. The product owner may influence the developers by helping them understand the select trade-offs. Commitment. Product goal. Product goal describes the future state of the product, which can serve as the target for the Scrum team to plan against. The product goal is in the product backlog. The rest of the product backlog emerges to define what will fulfill the product goal. A product is a vehicle to deliver value. It has a clear boundary, known stakeholders, well-defined users or customers. A product could be a service, a physical product, or something more abstract. A product goal is a long-term objective for the Scrum team. They must fulfill one objective before taking on the next. So, what is product backlog? The product backlog is nothing but the complete list of work to build the product. It is a list of work to build product. The product altogether. So it could be feature, user story, enhancement, defect, or in any form. Basically, what we have inside the product backlog is, we call it as product backlog items, PBI. Product backlog items. And this is never complete because as you take work from the PBI to the sprint and work on it, there are also a lot of other requirements that's getting added to the product backlog. So this is a never complete document, but an ongoing list, right? This is an ongoing list. Who is responsible for this? Product owner. So product owner is solely responsible for maintaining the product backlog items. Although he can get help from developers, Scrum Masters, but he is the one person who is responsible to keep it up to date, right? To remove all the obsolete requirements, to add in all the requirements that came from the stakeholder or from the development team on process improvement. So to keep the product backlog up to date is one of the key responsibility of the product owner. So this talks about product backlog refinement. Now that's where you discuss on the product backlog, break it into smaller piece of work and add more precise details to it. And in refinement, we also estimate the user story. Basically, developers who are going to work on it should do the estimate based on prior experience and assumptions. Next, for each of these artifacts, there is a commitment defined in the Scrum Guide. So for product backlog, the commitment is product goal. What I mean by that is the product backlog artifacts as such, the product backlog artifacts should focus on the product goal. So this is the basis to have the product backlog artifact, or that's the end goal of the product backlog. And this is long term. Building a product is long term when compared to the sprint backlog. So let's see the sprint backlog now. Sprint backlog. The sprint backlog is composed of sprint goal, the set of product backlog items selected for the sprint, as well as actionable plan for delivering the increment. The sprint backlog is a plan by and for the developers. It is a highly visible, real-time picture of the work that the developers plan to accomplish during the sprint in order to achieve the sprint goal. Consequently, the sprint backlog is updated throughout the sprint as more is learned. It should have enough details that they can inspect their progress in the daily scrum. Commitment, sprint goal. The sprint goal is the single objective of the sprint. Although the sprint goal is a commitment by the developers, it provides flexibility in terms of the exact work needed to achieve it. The sprint goal also creates coherence and focus, encouraging the Scrum team to work together rather than on separate initiatives. The sprint goal is created during the sprint planning event and then added to the sprint backlog. As the developers work during the sprint, they keep the sprint goal in mind. If the work turns out to be different than they expected, they collaborate with the product owner to negotiate the scope of the sprint backlog within the sprint without affecting the sprint goal. Sprint backlog is nothing but the subset of the product backlog. So it contains a list of everything that needs to be built in the sprint. It is also a list of work for the sprint. This is the ordered list of work to build the product, the complete list, out of which this is a subset of work which we are picking for the sprint. That is called sprint backlog. It is the real-time picture, like the visualization of what the Scrum team is working currently. And this is not an ongoing list, but this is a closed list. But if there is a change in the priority, then it goes for reprioritization. Who decides the sprint backlog is the developers. The product backlog is maintained by product owner, and although the product owner is the person who prioritizes the work for the sprint, it is the developers who decide on what can be taken for the sprint, what can be achieved in that sprint, right? And what is the commitment for sprint backlog? The commitment is sprint goal. So for sprint backlog artifact, the main commitment is to focus on the sprint goal. And as we said, sprint goal should never change throughout the sprint. If there is a situation where the sprint goal is no more valid, then it calls for the cancellation of the sprint itself. And the last artifact is increment. Increment. An increment is a concrete stepping stone towards the product goal. Each increment is additive to all prior increments and thoroughly verified, ensuring that all increments works together. In order to provide value, the increment must be usable. Multiple increments may be created within a sprint. The sum of the increment is presented at the sprint review, thus supporting empiricism. However, an increment may be delivered to stakeholder prior to end of the sprint. The sprint review should never be considered as a gate to releasing value. Work cannot be considered part of an increment unless it meets definition of done. Commitment, definition of done. The definition of done is a formal description of the state of the increment where it meets the quality measures required for the product. The moment a product backlog item meets the definition of done, an increment is born. The definition of done creates transparency by providing everyone a shared understanding of what work was completed as part of the increment. If the product backlog item does not meet the definition of done, it cannot be released or even presented at the sprint review. Instead, it returns to the product backlog for future consideration. If the definition of done for an increment is part of the standards of the organization, all Scrum teams must follow it as a minimum. If it is not an organizational standard, the Scrum team must create a definition of done appropriate for the product. The developers are required to confirm on the definition of done. If there are multiple Scrum teams working together on a product, they must mutually define and comply with the same definition of done. And increment is nothing but the delivered work. Or we can say delivered value. Each sprint should focus on incrementing the value. Every time you increment the product, it is the responsibility of the development team to ensure that all the increments works together, and that's when it is a usable product. So this artifact is updated during the sprint review. So that's one opportunity to inspect the completed work and add it to the increment. But if the team wants to increment the product even in mid of the sprint, they can very well do it. The sprint review should never be considered as a gate to releasing value. So whenever the increment is ready and if there's a priority, the team can go and deliver the value. But the formal way of doing this is it gets updated during the sprint review. So what is the commitment for the increment? The commitment is definition of done. So the increment artifact should be committed to focus on definition of done. The definition of done is nothing but a quality gate. It's a list of criteria that the team defines to say that the work is done or not. So when the product backlog item is completed, it is validated against this definition of done to confirm whether it's done or not. If it doesn't meet the DOD, then it cannot be considered as an increment, but it goes again back to the product backlog for rework. So there are multiple ways of approaching this definition of done based on your organization. Some organizations have a standard set of DODs which all the teams can pick as a minimum set of requirement, or there are teams who defines the DOD by themselves based on the requirement for their project. In any case, developers should first understand and confirm the DOD before starting to work on the product. I hope this gives you a simple view on what are the artifacts, why do we do it, and what is the commitment for each of the artifacts. Thank you for listening to me till the end. I hope the time you spent is valuable. Hope I have given you a deeper understanding of Scrum Guide. Please leave your comment on whether you find this valuable or not. Your suggestions and comments means a lot. And if you're feeling more generous, please subscribe to my channel and watch out my other videos. The channel runs on your motivation. Thank you.